Once there was a kingdom known as Paradise. It wasn't known as Paradise because it was more beautiful than any other kingdom. Rather, it was known as Paradise because of the way the citizens who lived there treated one another with kindness and compassion and fairness. And the tenor was set by the king himself, for he knew that the way he treated his subjects would shape the way they treated one another. When the king died, his son, the prince, assumed the throne. And the prince was nothing like his father. He was hard-hearted. One day, two of his advisors entered the throne room and said, "Your Majesty, a tragedy is unfolding in a corner of the kingdom. A famine has struck, and all the people are hungry. If we do not feed them, they will die." The prince reached into a bowl of fruit beside his throne, took a bite of an apple, and said, "Well, I'm sorry if they're hungry. I have plenty to eat. If they're going to die, it's just not my problem." The two advisors were stunned, but there was nothing more they could do, so they turned to leave. Soon thereafter, two other of the royal court entered the throne room and said, "Your Majesty, in another corner of the kingdom, a drought has struck. The people are dying of thirst. If we don't help them, they will perish." The prince poured himself a glass of water, took a long sip, and said to the advisors, "Well, I'm sorry if they're thirsty. I have plenty to drink. If they're going to die of thirst, it's just not my problem." Pretty soon, all the citizens of the realm began to treat one another with the same coarseness. No one even recalled why the kingdom had once been called Paradise, except for one fisherman, an old man, who determined he was going to teach this kingdom and that prince a lesson. So he brought his old fishing boat to the center of the harbor, and he began to work on it. He sanded and he painted, and he sanded and he painted, and day by day people came to watch him work. And they said, "Fisherman, what is it that you're doing?" And the fisherman responded, "Well, I'm turning my old fishing boat into a yacht." And they said, "That's wonderful. When it's done, do you think you can take us all for a ride?" And the fisherman said, "Of course, when the work is complete, everyone will be invited to come aboard." Well, it took a number of months, but by late spring, early summer, the work was complete. The yacht sat in the center of the harbor, glistening in the sunshine. And on one beautiful summer morning, the fishermen decided to allow everyone aboard to enjoy the day. Even the prince came. The fisherman brought the yacht out into the center of the harbor. He dropped the anchor, and he invited everyone to open up their picnic baskets and even to go for a swim. Along about 2 o'clock, the winds began to pick up, and a number of those aboard said to the fishermen, "You know, it's been a beautiful day, but the weather has begun to get rough. Perhaps it's time we go back to dock." And the fisherman agreed. He said, "Of course. But first, there is one thing I must do." And with that, he went below deck, and he came back with a drill. And he positioned himself in the center of the boat, and he began to drill a hole in the center of the boat. The passengers began to panic. "What are we going to do?" "Let's get the prince," they said. "He'll know what to do." So they went and found the prince sunning himself on the foredeck. And they brought him back to the center of the boat where the fisherman was drilling the hole. And the prince said to the fisherman in his most royal tones, "Fisherman, what are you doing?" "I'm drilling a hole," responded the fisherman. "Well, why are you drilling a hole?" "I don't know. It's a nice day to drill holes. It's my boat. It's my drill. I can do what I want." "Fisherman, don't you understand that if you drill a hole in the bottom of this boat, water will come in and the boat will sink, and I can't swim, and I don't want to drown?" "You can't swim. You don't want to drown. Well, I'm sorry. That's just not my problem." "What do you mean it's not your problem?" the prince said, all tones of royalty gone. "If I have a problem, you have a problem. And if you have a problem, I have a problem. And if anybody has a problem, everybody has a problem, because we're all in the same boat." We are all in the same boat. And if we don't stand together as brothers and sisters, we will perish together as fools. Dear friends, I am honored to join you this morning. I wish different circumstances had brought me here, of course, but it is nonetheless a privilege to stand beside Dr. Butts and Imam Talib and to stand before God and all of you in this great congregation. If a rabbi can have a church, Abyssinian is my church. And if a rabbi can have a pastor, Dr. Butts is my pastor. So when he calls, I answer. Do you know the story of Pastor Martin Niemöller? Martin Niemöller was imprisoned 7 years in the concentration camps for his outspoken criticism of the Nazis, whose spiritual progeny descended on Charlottesville this weekend. Well, if you hadn't heard of Pastor Niemöller, you've probably heard his admonition. First, they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. Niemöller's self-rebuke reminds us what this tragedy in Charlottesville proved yet again, that we are all in the same boat, that bigots are equal opportunity haters. Those white supremacists were also carrying anti-Semitic placards. The rally's organizer, Jason Kessler, also denounces Charlottesville as a sanctuary city for immigrants. But let us be clear about what drew this particular crowd of Klansmen and neo-Nazis together: racism. The statue of General Robert E. Lee is not just another icon. It is a brazen symbol of the slavery of yesterday and the institutionalized racism of today. Now, I don't hold President Trump responsible for every act of hate that occurs under his watch, but I do hold him accountable for how he responds. And yesterday's response was ghastly. His equating of the many sides involved, as if the white nationalists occupied the same moral footing as those who stood against them. You know, I had never taken the president as a thinker of great nuance. But when it comes to racism and nativism, he somehow finds many sides to the issue. Mr. President, you cannot tamp down the fires of hate with one hand while stoking them with the other. Your continued assault on political correctness, which risks desensitizing the many to the concerns of the few, and your aversion to identity politics, downplaying focus on those concerns, has energized an assortment of bigots and given license to their expressions of hate. You are uniquely positioned but painfully slow to denounce. Your failure during the campaign to repudiate promptly David Duke's support emboldened those who thought, hey, maybe now we can get away with this stuff. And now they are. And we are all in the same boat. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. The concerns of American Muslims for their physical safety in this moment of suspicion and mistrust must be our concerns. The anxieties of immigrant children over the potential deportation of their parents must be our anxieties. The outrage of the transgender community over the rollback of their protections must be our outrage. The disgust at the rise of anti-Semitic activity must be our disgust. And the fears of African Americans when confronted by the police must be our fears. In the wake of yesterday's violence, I recalled an interview with Hetty Epstein, a Holocaust survivor who was arrested on the streets of Ferguson protesting the police shooting of Michael Brown. She spoke of how, on arriving in the United States in 1948, she was stunned by Southern racism. She knew what we know. Anti-Semitism, racism, Islamophobia, all emanate from the same pathology, the failure to discern in those who are different a common humanity. As people of faith, we understand that God fashioned us from the same person to remind us that we are all brothers and sisters. Therefore, no one should ever say to another, "My lineage is greater than yours." Jewish tradition teaches that the angels in heaven directed God to make Adam with bits of clay from all over the earth so that none should ever say, "My ethnicity is greater than yours," and that the clay should be of varying shades so that none could say, "My color is superior to yours." As people of faith, we share the belief that the same divine spark that animated the first human being burns in all of us. We share the hope for a society at peace with itself. One president did respond appropriately yesterday: Barack Obama. And he did so with the words of Nelson Mandela. "No one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin or his background or his religion. People must learn to hate. And if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love." If I have a problem, you have a problem. And if you have a problem, I have a problem. And if anyone has a problem, everyone has a problem, because we're all in the same boat. The prince repeated the words to himself, finally understanding. The fishermen returned the boat to shore, and everyone disembarked. From that day forward, the prince ruled his land with justice and kindness, and the kingdom was paradise once again.